Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Bon matin à tous. Welcome to today's webinar presented by the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Moncton, the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce, and the St. John Region Chamber of Commerce. My name is John Wishart, and I am CEO of the Greater Moncton Chamber. It's great to start off what we all hope will be a much better new year by presenting our first Zoom presentation of 2021 in partnership with our colleagues in Fredericton and St. John. Today, we're very pleased to present two speakers who will present some new data on purchasing, travel, and economic trends in Atlantic Canada. And in light of yesterday's news about air travel to and from New Brunswick, the travel intentions are timely. And I believe we have at least two airport CEOs on the call today, eager, I'm sure, for that data. MQO Research, which is part of the largest integrated marketing communications group in Atlantic Canada, Group M5, conducted an online survey of more than 1,100 Atlantic Canadians in late November. Alors que les milieux d'affaires de la région prennent des mesures pour s'adapter à notre reprise post-pandémique, le type de données pour vous aider et vous préparer à planifier. With us today to present the survey results is Leanne Sarson, the Vice President of Research and Engagement with MQO. Leanne received her MSc in Industrial Organizational Psychology from St. Mary's University and has expertise in research design and management, qualitative analysis, facilitation, organizational development, and consultation. She's a member of Canadian Evaluation Society and has worked with large and small businesses, government organizations, and not-for-profits throughout Atlantic Canada. Leanne is a passionate advocate for evidence-based practice and understands the importance of incorporating the unique culture and needs of each client in creating solutions that work. With Leanne today is someone who is a familiar face to those of you in New Brunswick's business community. Victor Boudreau joined the M5 group of companies as Vice President of Business Development in October of 2018, following a 14-year career in provincial politics. From 2004 to 2018, he served as the member of the New Brunswick Legislative Assembly for the riding of Shediac-Beaubassin-Capellet. During those years, Victor served as Minister of several portfolios, including Finance, Economic Development, the Regional Development Corporation, and Health. He also served as interim leader of the Liberal Party and leader of the official opposition from 2010 to 2012. Victor is a social sciences graduate from the University of Moncton, and he's accumulated 28 years of experience in all levels of government, including time as Director General of the Village de Capellet and Chef de Cabinet de Ministre Provincial et Fédéral. Today's presentation will be followed by Q&A, where you get to ask your questions of Leanne and Victor. And we encourage you to submit your question at any time by using the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will follow up the presentation with as many questions as time allows. Now, the Q&A portion of today's webinar will be moderated by my friend and colleague, Krista Ross, the CEO of the Fredericton Chamber, while our friend David Duplessis, CEO of the St. John Region Chamber, will deliver some closing remarks. With that, Victor, I believe we're starting with you, and then you can pass the baton to Leanne. So the floor is now yours.
Thank you, John, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I want to start by wishing everybody a Happy New Year. Alors, bonjour tout le monde, content de voir autant de participants et participantes. J'aimerais commencer de la part du groupe M5 par vous souhaiter une bonne et heureuse année. On va souhaiter que 2021 soit une meilleure année que 2020. Nous réalisons que ça a été assez difficile sur bien des commerces, bien des entreprises de la province. Alors, souhaitons que les choses vont s'améliorer. I want to sincerely thank the three chambers of commerce of Greater Moncton, of Fredericton, and of the St. John region for hosting this webinar. This is a bit of a follow-up on a survey that we shared with the three chambers back in June of 2020. So we have some updated information and some new information that we're going to be sharing with you. in just a few moments. But first, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of Group M5, who we are and what we do. Alors, avant de commencer la présentation formelle, j'aurais aimé quand même prendre quelques minutes seulement pour vous parler un peu du groupe M5, les compagnies qui font partie de notre organisation et les services que nous offrons. So, Leanne, if you want to move me to the next slide, please. So when we talk about Group M5, there are a group of companies that fall under that heading. Obviously, today's presentation is being given by MQO Research, which is our in-house market research company. Market research obviously is a very powerful tool when it comes to making decisions, whether it be for business, government, or various organizations. And data-driven decisions are always the best ones. So MQO does fantastic work across Atlantic Canada and beyond, both quantitative and qualitative research. We have focus group facilities in all 4 Atlantic provinces. And Leanne obviously leads a lot of the work that gets done within MQO Research for the variety of clients we have across the region. But MQO, as we said, is also part of the M5 group of companies, which also includes M5 Marketing Communications. So we are a full service, fully integrated marketing agency. This year is actually our 40th anniversary. I'm going to have to update that little stat there. This year is actually our 40th anniversary as an organization, and we have over 120 employees across the 4 Atlantic provinces serving our clients. So I like to say we are specialists as opposed to generalists. We have teams of people that work on specific types of projects all day long, as opposed to working with generalists who may touch on different things, different aspects. Alors, nous sommes une agence totalement intégrée. Les 5 compagnies travaillent ensemble et combinées, nous avons au-delà de 120 employés à travers le Canada. We also have amongst the group M5 Public Affairs. So we have a team of 8 people that are dedicated to public affairs, so everything like public relations, government relations, media training, crisis communications, those types of services. We have, again, people in all 4 Atlantic provinces that can help with that. And we have, a network of people that are very well connected, if you will, throughout the 4 Atlantic provinces, as well as with the federal government. We have Wavelight Productions, which is our in-house audio video production company. So any type of corporate video, a TV commercial, radio ad, documentary, anything that would require audio, video, or animation, we have that capacity to serve our clients in-house. And last but not least, we have a Group ATN. So Group ATN is a small consultancy that's come on board a little over a year ago now, I believe, with the M5 group of companies. There's a former deputy minister, there's an economist, a group of researchers, and they can do things like economic impact assessments, feasibility studies, any type of data crunching, number crunching that needs to occur. Close to 50% of what Group ATN does is with our First Nations across Atlantic Canada as well. So they work with a lot of Indigenous groups and communities and really have become experts in that field as well. So that's the group of companies. Leanne, if you would move on to the next slide, please. So just to give you a perspective of our footprint, as I said, we do have a very solid presence in all 4 Atlantic provinces, but over the last few months, we've actually been able to grow across Canada. So we have boots on the ground, as we say, M5ers on the ground now in Montreal and Toronto and Winnipeg and Vancouver. thanks to the work that we do in particular for one of our larger clients, which is Subway. But obviously it gives us, as I say, boots on the ground across the country now. So we're obviously always looking for opportunities to expand and grow. We work with clients of all size, small, medium, and large, government, not-for-profit, private sector companies as well. Next slide, please, Leanne. Again, just a summary of the services. These are the most common services that we offer as a company. I could add quite a few more bullets to that slide if I wanted to, but just to give you a snapshot of some of the things we offer. So everything from search engine marketing to social media, to creative services, to website development, community relations, and the list goes on. So we like to refer to ourselves as a one-stop shop. We're able to serve our clients from beginning to end in whatever size campaign they have, but we always wrap them with a small team of dedicated staff so that they get that boutique agency feel when they're dealing with M5. Alors, c'est ça, la panoplie de services que nous offrons sont là. Nous travaillons avec des entreprises et des organisations et des agences gouvernementales de toute grandeur, un peu partout de la région. Et nous pouvons faire des campagnes au niveau régional, national et international. So I know you're not here to hear about the services we offer, but we really want to get into the nuts and bolts of today's webinar, which is some of the data that we've been able to collect just at the tail end of 2020 in regards to the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has been having on our economy globally and in New Brunswick. So I am going to hand it over now to Leanne Sarson, who, as was mentioned, a colleague of mine who's based out of Halifax and who's the VP Research and Engagement for MQO Research. So Leanne, over to you.
Thank you so much, Victor. So as Victor said, we had the opportunity to do some of this research and share it with you back in June. At that point, we had collected research in May. It was at sort of the very beginning of things kind of settling in terms of people getting used to some of the restrictions. So when we presented the data in the summer, Atlantic Canada was in a fantastic place relatively speaking. And we were able to sort of think about looking ahead, and we knew that we wanted to check back in because while Atlantic Canada is doing very well, it hasn't been a steady upward climb. As you all know, there's been ups and downs and everything has been very uncertain. This is an unprecedented time. So it was very important to us to be able to make sure that we didn't make assumptions about the data that we collected in May, translating through some of the major changes that have happened in the pandemic. Most particularly in November, when we collected this set of data, the coming holidays, news of the second wave, and sort of the inklings of that as Atlantic Canada did go through sort of ebbs and flows and cases, as well as the announcement of the vaccine. So I'm really just trying to impart hopefully some updated information that you will be able to use to be able to make decisions as you strategize and try and move through these trying times. So we're checking in on the data that we've learned over the last 7 to 8 months. And just to provide a little context, as I did the last time I was here, again, the data that we are collecting, we have to be conscious of the time that we're collecting it. So we've seen things move very quickly in certain aspects of consumer mindset. So for example, things like how welcoming residents are to travelers from outside has changed, fluctuated very quickly with the state of lockdowns, number of cases. So there's a lot of importance in providing context around when data was collected. This particular set of data was collected around the end of November. At that point, we had some instances of second waves happening in Atlantic Canada in different places. There were changes to the Atlantic bubble, which has shifted again since, and the vaccine had been announced, although hadn't been rolled out. It was here. So other things to keep in mind is that obviously behavior has shifted during the pandemic, but what we're seeing is some of the things we're going to talk about today is evidence that it's potentially going to change. So when we're thinking about trying to move through, use this data to make decisions, yes, we're trying to try our best to take advantage of opportunities that are presented now, try and just make it and hold on until things start to climb back to normal. But we also have to have an understanding about some of these things being decisions that may need to strategically hang on, because we know that some of these behaviors aren't going to go after the pandemic. The competitive landscape has changed, which is something I'm sure you're all well aware of. And we're in a very different position now than we were, not only just before COVID, but even than we were in the spring. So just to provide a little context of the data that I'm going to be talking about. This is just a little bit of an overview of some of the survey details. So we collected a little bit more than we did on the first round. There's about 1,100 folks that we spoke to online between November 12th and November 24th. And you can see the breakdown of age by province when we're talking about specifically about New Brunswick, as well as household income. Some of the other things that we've been sort of tracking is employment, how people are working from home, remotely. So all of these things have effects that sort of radiate out beyond just the fact that people are working remotely, in terms of traffic for businesses, changes to even things like the amount of food people eat for takeout versus cooking at home. So we know that there are 28% of folks that are actually still working from home in New Brunswick at the time that we collected the data, and that was down from 43% when we took a look at this in May. So a lot of people have gone back to work as we've managed to adjust and change lockdowns and restrictions to sort of manage the pandemic as best we can, and outbreaks and community spread as best we can. So, but right at the time of this data collection, there was still about 28% working from home. 20% at that point had returned to their workplace from remote work. And 53% were still working in their workplace and had not had to work from home. And there's a couple other stats there around reduction in hours. So 37% of Atlantic Canadians had seen a reduction in hours, income, job loss, and or job changes due to COVID. And 43% of New Brunswickers are worried about job security over the next 12 months. That was a little bit higher among those who were currently still full-time employed. It was about 52%. So getting into some of the travel, we know that COVID has obviously had a massive impact on travel, and the news around Air Canada yesterday was particularly impactful. 39% of Atlantic Canadians at the time that we collected this data in November had plans for a major vacation. This was down from 47% in May, where we know the data that we collected in early spring was still early enough in the pandemic that folks were not sure how long they were going to have to hold out. A lot of things were postponed as opposed to not outright canceled. People didn't know when things were going to kind of open and how it was going to be managed. So at this point, at the data that we've collected now, I expect this to settle in and not change too much between now and the remainder of at least the primary tourism season into the fall. And we see 98% have canceled or postponed plans as opposed to 93% in May. Some of this is also going to be impacted by the season, where the spring was going into the summer season, and now we are looking at the winter and going into the second COVID tourism season. So we wanted to get an understanding of whether or not people were willing to take overnight trips within their province, because obviously the ability for us to travel, not just in Canada, but outside of Canada as well, has been severely impacted. So the snowbirds and folks that are used to taking their down south trip, are they going to be replacing that with overnight travel within the province? And we do see that in May, again, where people were still a little unsure if they were going to be able to still grab their trips, we had lower intentions in taking overnight trips in the province, where people are settling in a little more to that idea. And we see in New Brunswick, 36% of folks are looking to take or willing to take overnight trips within the province, as opposed to 23% back in May. In Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, you see much larger spikes there. Now, we've done a lot of different travel surveys, event surveys, and we do have a good understanding, even outside of this particular data set. We've had the opportunity to collect data over the summer and the fall in different periods as well. And we do know that people are staying closer to home. And that's not even just within the province. People are, there's sort of a 2-hour radius where you see a big drop between intentions to travel. So people are really hunkering down and looking for things, new things to experience and new things to do close to where they are. Those who are traveling, and that's particularly salient among older New Brunswickers and older Atlantic Canadians. 38% of staycations are replacing previously planned out-of-province travel. So people are, even those that are willing to go a little bit outside of their sort of 2-hour community window, are looking at their own province or Atlantic Canada more likely for travel. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with the quarantine, but also people's level of comfort, which we're going to talk about later. One of the things we were asking ourselves back in the spring is whether or not people were going to adjust to this sort of new way of living with the pandemic, if purchasing confidence and economic confidence is going to start going up as people got more used to this kind of new way of life. And we're not seeing that in most of those categories, but as I said, I'll talk about that later. But it's particularly salient in travel, where people are wanting to stay in a place where they are familiar with the health regulations, where they have a level of control over their ability to prepare and understand how safe they can be. And we saw that through a lot of different questions that we asked in our travel research, from what kind of accommodations people were comfortable with staying in, as well as what type of modes of travel they were willing to take. That the common thread through all of those was people wanted to be able to stay with people that they knew, travel with people that they knew, stay places where they were very familiar, and all of that said to us that people wanted to, again, be able to kind of have more control and less uncertainty in their travel. Another thing that we found with our travel intentions, which is very clear and probably not much of a surprise, is the average spend on the staycations or those trips that are closer to home is much smaller than what people are willing to spend when they leave the province, and in particular when they leave the country. So while the average amount of spend was closer to around $1,000 for overnight trips and vacations within Atlantic Canada, it was $4,000 when we were asking about what people had spent or had planned to spend on trips out of country. And we found a lot of that was reallocated to making their home more comfortable, which makes a lot of sense when you think about the fact that people are working from home, they can't travel. So people are reallocating those funds to things like home renovations, to landscaping, to home decor, to even clothing that you spend more time in at home. Like there's research that has shown increases in pajamas, housecoats, slippers, those types of cozy clothing. So people are not necessarily taking all of the money they had previously allocated for out-of-province trips and putting it on experiences and travel close to home. They're cutting that and reallocating those funds. So in terms of going outside of their own province to another province in Atlantic Canada, you can see here again, people are getting a little more comfortable in November with traveling around to other Atlantic Canadian provinces. So you see increases with the exception of Newfoundland in the maritime provinces there, with folks being willing to hop around a little more. This is just a reflection of what people are planning to spend. This was actually not updated from the May data, but you can see sort of the difference between in-province and out-of-province willingness to spend. So all this is again to say that New Brunswick is likely to draw the majority of travel from Atlantic Canadian provinces in through 2021. So we have actually seen an increase in likelihood to travel in Atlantic Canada and stay close to home in November as opposed to May. And I don't necessarily think that people would have been less likely to travel close to home in May. It's just back in May, people were even less sure of how long this was going to go on. And so those decisions were, people were hanging on to the hope that they might be able to go down south. The great thing about this is people are still looking to travel and to do new things. And so they have the opportunity, or we have the opportunity, to grab folks that may not have tried some experiences close to home. In particular, again, I point to those folks, snowbirds or people that tend to travel down south into warmer climates who haven't tried some of the options for experiences during the winter close to home. So the opportunity here is where people are looking to stay close to home and try new things. And we do know that there's an increase in people trying new things. You have the chance to grab some of those new customers and show them a good experience that may bring them back in future years. So 50% of respondents indicated that they are likely to visit another Atlantic Canadian province. Only 36 outside of Atlantic Canada, and the likelihood of traveling outside of Canada was considerably lower, and this was very stable with what we saw in May. So May was about 14%, and in November is only 16%, indicating a likelihood to travel to the US. And again, outside of Canada was 19%, which was not really much of a variation from what we saw in May, which was only at 18%. One of the other things that we wanted to share, again, this is things that have been pulled from a variety of primary research that we've done across a number of studies, is we now feel like we have a good sense of what an ideal getaway is for 2021. So based on travelers' comfort level, based on what they have shared with what their concerns are around health, how far they're willing to go, what they're comfortable with in terms of accommodations and travel and things, we know that people are looking for new experiences, but there are some caveats around those experiences. So they're looking for things that are short term. They want to be able to make decisions quickly. So they're not planning out in advance. Something that's put in front of them, they're more likely to make a spontaneous decision on that. They're looking for things that are self-guided. And again, this comes down to being able to control. They're looking for more relaxation and small parties, events. People are much more comfortable with outdoor events, in particular, those that are under 100. Once you get near that 100, you really start to see a drop off in comfort level. Private accommodations are far more appealing than not, although we do see, interestingly, in large hotels, people are comfortable with those a little more than smaller hotels. And based on some of the other things we've seen, we expect that is because people have an expectation that with a larger organization, there is a stricter adherence to public health regulations. Private transportation, again, that control, and staying close to home. So these are some of the things that make up sort of what we consider the ideal 2021 getaway in terms of what the majority of people feel comfortable with. And this goes kind of across the ages to varying degrees. Obviously, there are less folks in the older age categories that are willing to travel, but they're still looking for the same thing. So we didn't see a huge difference when it comes to age in terms of what people are looking for. People still want that level of control. They're staying close to home. They're looking to keep their group small and well-known. And they're looking for events where they can stay outside, be private, and have sort of smaller crowds. So one of the important things that we had talked about back in June as well was, as we are looking to be able to draw people in from Atlantic Canada and eventually from the rest of Canada, we need to make sure that their experiences are positive, so we can draw them back in the future. And with the pandemic and with the opportunity for community spread and a lot of the cases coming in being a result of travel, there were a lot of instances in the summer of negative reactions to people that were coming from the outside, or people that were perceived as coming from out of province that may not even been from out of province. So one of the things that has been tracked is how welcoming or how willing residents are of accepting folks from other Atlantic Canadian provinces, as well as outside of Canada. Because as you know, changes in cases don't always go together with Atlantic Canada. So each of the Atlantic Canadian provinces has experienced their own sort of lows and highs in terms of the pandemic. So in November, New Brunswick residents had a high level of comfort in welcoming visitors from Atlantic Canada to the province. They were very comfortable with that, but much less so from those provinces outside of Atlantic Canada. So you can see here in terms of the little spike there's actually an increase in terms of comfort with Atlantic Canadians, a little bit of a dip with those from outside of Atlantic Canada, which makes a lot of sense given the fact that outside of the Atlantic provinces, there have been bigger challenges with the second wave and a lot larger spikes. So I know we're going to do some questions later, so I'm going to move into spending and economic confidence so we can get to some of the, what do we do with this, what are the takeaways, and have some discussion around it. So Atlantic Canadian spending is actually starting to show signs of trending back up to pre-COVID levels. which is great. It's a slow trend, but it's a trend. So people have reported, far fewer people reported spending less on sort of the major categories, spending categories that we were tracking. The other thing that we noted was that alcoholic beverages and cannabis products had also gone down in terms of a lot of folks were spending more on those in May. Those were reported as down in November. Overall, if you take a look at the Rbc Spending Tracking, we're actually, although there are some changes and fluctuations that flow with lockdowns, we actually find that in November and again in January, we're not that much lower than where we were at this time in the previous year. It is lower, but spending has gone up definitely from the significant drop that we saw back in the spring. Again, the categories are shifted a little bit. So entertainment is still up. I mentioned within clothing, there's some changes. So you can see there are certain consumer trends in terms of where they're putting that money, but overall spending is rebounding. So this table just illustrates Atlantic Canada versus New Brunswick, so that you have that there. So obviously very closely tied to spending is economic confidence and the perception of where the economy is going. 60% of New Brunswickers feel that it will take years for the economy to recover. And I mean, there is a change between what we saw in May and November, but not a significant change. That's mostly remained stable. The economy, the perception that it's going to take years is where a little over half of the New Brunswickers have kind of feel in terms of recovery. There is the biggest change was in whether or not the economy was going to get back to normal within the next few months. So you saw that drop off quite a bit, but again, that's a very small percentage. For the most part, it's about 12 months to 2 years before New Brunswickers expect a full economic recovery. Some things that we tracked this time that we hadn't taken a look at last time were around mental health and the impacts to vulnerable populations. Now, we wanted to take a look at this because, as we'll talk about in a moment, the concern, the level of fear and uncertainty around the health impacts and the economic impacts was very high. We didn't look at mental health, and what we found was 77% of New Brunswickers are concerned about the mental health impacts of COVID-19 restrictions. And again, it's important to note that this was collected in November, and at that time, we had seen some ebbs and flows. So at this point, we've been dealing with the consequences of lockdown, not lockdown, the concern about COVID and all of the public health regulations that come along with that for coming up on a year, for 8 months. And so the longer that goes on, the higher the strain in being able to maintain those things, and having sort of that long-term ongoing fear and anxiety over the economy and over health does have a toll. 83% of New Brunswickers are also concerned about the impact of continued restrictions on vulnerable populations. So in terms of some of the things that we did track previously around perception of the economy and health, again, you don't see a lot of change. It's still very, very high. So one of the questions, as I had said earlier, that we asked ourselves back in the spring is, what is this going to look like as people sort of adjust to the pandemic? And what we're finding is that people haven't sort of settled in and become more complacent about health regulations or about fears around the economy. And part of that is likely due to the fact that we have had a lot of blips. So there have been a lot of ups and downs, and we haven't had a steady sort of control over the pandemic. There is still a lot of uncertainty. So even though when we collected this data, the vaccine had been announced, there were still a lot of questions, and there still remain a lot of questions around what that means in terms of when things will get back to normal, the percentage of the population that will need to be vaccinated, concerns over the vaccine itself. So we know that one of the things we collected was willingness to actually take the vaccine, and we found that 63% of New Brunswickers said they would be willing to take the vaccine once it is proven safe. And that is actually a little bit of a dip from previous, and that may be due to the fact that when we asked back in the spring if you were willing to take the vaccine, and it was closer to 75%, at that point, it wasn't real. So when we asked again, the vaccine had been come out and they existed. And so that did drop a little bit. So you can see here that long-term economic impact has not changed. It's remained at 90% from the spring. The same with the concern for the second wave. The concern over higher taxes has dipped a little bit. The concern is becoming infected with COVID-19 yourself has remained fairly steady. Access to healthcare, that as a concern has gone up. And again, that could be tied to the second wave and slight increases in cases. However, the job security or fear over job security has decreased from the spring, which is a positive. So although, again, the support for public health response in New Brunswick has dropped a little bit since May, it still remains very high. So you can see here in May, there were incredibly high scores around the availability of public health information, around support for the restrictions due to COVID-19, supports that were available for individuals and families and businesses, and access to testing. And you see the biggest drops there around the supports for individuals and families and supports for businesses, which is not surprising as as CERB changed and as the business supports changed as the pandemic dragged on. So you can see the drop there, but they still remain fairly high. So I sped through a lot of that, although you will have access to the slides after, so you can go back and take a look at some of the numbers. But the important thing here is, what do you do with all this information? So generally, I would say overall, although we've seen a slight increase in purchasing, concern has remained incredibly high, and there hasn't been a lot of changes in terms of the consumer mindset, in terms of what they want from us as businesses, in terms of what they're looking for, in terms of their fears, and in terms of their confidence in terms of the economic recovery. So what do we do with that information, knowing that we are 9 months out, we've gotten pretty good at handling the changes and the ebbs and flows and the restrictions in living in this type of environment, but it hasn't changed the underlying mindset. So one of the main takeaways, as I said, is the pandemic is still here. There continues to be a lot of fear and uncertainty. And so all of our efforts to continue to navigate this, try and figure out how to market within this environment with changing behaviors, it needs to be within that context. So spending is rebounding, but it is slow. Consumer mindset and behavior has changed. So one thing we didn't talk about asking specifically, but we do know from other research, is that people have shifted to online. There have been significant shifts to online shopping. And as well, about 38% of people are trying new brands. So brand loyalty has gone down quite a bit, which is opening up opportunities for new products and brands, but it is painful for some existing brands trying to maintain loyal customers, especially if there were challenges in trying to pivot to online platforms and online shopping. And there are opportunities close to home. So I'd say those are the four takeaways. I think that although we're entering a new year, we have a vaccine, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's still a lot of uncertainty, and it's not time to sort of turn off the efforts to push against this kind of environment. So a lot of these you may remember from June, if you joined us in June for our chat then, but a lot of them are still incredibly relevant. This is an opportunity to re-examine your current marketing strategy. So we know that people are moving online. We know that there is a high level of concern still. Take a look at what you're doing, where you're doing it. A lot of folks have moved to influencer-based and more social media presence in terms of their marketing strategies. Make sure that you're not missing out on opportunities. So this one is crucial and is really important, given the fact that, again, a lot of people are trying new things. People are looking for products in ways that they had not before. People are searching for things closer to home. There is a push to buy local. So make sure that your information is up to date on all your channels. Look for ways to improve stopgap measures. I would be so interested, and I would love to hear if folks that had back in May, when people had just finished sort of pivoting and figuring out how to reach customers during lockdowns, if they had solidified or worked to improve on any of those. And I mean, this doesn't mean that it's a massive investment to be able to try and make that shift if you weren't dipping your toe in the water of online shopping or be able to provide curbside. But there are ways to get around it. And it's really just about making sure that you're speaking to your customers and finding out how they're reacting to it and continuing to improve on that. So one thing that I'd stressed early on is, and we have asked consumers this, and we do find that about 40% of folks anticipate that changes in their behavior in terms of shopping are going to stick around following the pandemic. So this isn't, I wouldn't look at an increased online presence and things like curbside pickup and that sort of omnipresence in terms of shopping as something to just get you through the pandemic, but it's something that you should embrace and try and move and think about as continuing to improve and enact on beyond the pandemic. And it doesn't, as I said, the investment, there are a lot of ways that people have found to work together to try and make it easier. There are things that you can do to lighten the burden of not necessarily having to set up your own existing online shop. Things like Not Amazon, if you've heard of that, that is really focusing on supporting and providing a resource and an easy to use platform to compete with things like the Amazon, but for local businesses. Are ways, there are a lot of resources like that that can help ease some of the burden of moving to online. Tracking your results, again, this is something that we talked about in the spring, so hopefully people were able to take a look at what they were doing and to track it to see what's working and what's not. And again, this ties back to taking a look at your customers and talking to them. Considering the shifting focus from promoting premium products to more everyday items, this goes along with that understanding of where people are spending in terms of consumer spending. There has been a shift, although a lot fewer people are working remotely now, there is still that changing consumer mindset, which has shifted focus to certain products. The fact that folks are close to home, thinking about how people are living their lives in the pandemic may result in you rethinking things that you want to push to the front in terms of product promotion. This one is one that I think is incredibly important as we are, again, 8-9 months into the pandemic, and we haven't seen a lot of change in terms of people becoming more comfortable with the threat. Investing in consumer confidence is key. People are still fearful. Acknowledging that and respecting that fear, offering comfort and reassurance is important. We found that people don't want to have to dig to find out what businesses are doing for health and safety. They don't want to have to go out of their way to make sure that you have options like curbside pickup, that you are supporting mask wearing, things like that. So putting those things out front and encouraging consumers that you are following public health and safety regulations and that you can provide some level of safety. Again, I talk about the comfort with crowds and being able to control your environment. Things like a lot of photos of in the store so they can see how distant they can be from people, how crowded it is, videos, photos on social media, all of those things provide a level of confidence and that, again, sense of control when people are looking for shopping. So as people get back out physically, providing those things will increase their level of comfort. Making sure you have clear information on your plans to meet public health requirements is obviously very tied in close to that. So looking at how the competitive landscape has changed, talking to your customers and considering if you can turn this challenge into an opportunity. I spoke about the percentage of people that are trying new things and the fact that people that are used to traveling outside of the province are stuck home. These are new clients that you can, or new customers that you can access. So trying to find ways to reach those folks, you may be able to take those into the post-pandemic world. The other thing that I think is very important coming out of this, and we've seen this touched on in other research projects that we've done as well, as we're asking business owners to take a look strategically at what they're doing and try and think long-term about the changes they've made, solidify and improve on some of the things that they've had to pivot to do. It's important to recognize that business owners, maybe even more than the general public, are still subject to the mental health toll of the ongoing pandemic. It is impacting everyone. Business owners have additional stresses, and acknowledging this and seeking support will benefit you and your business. So as you attend webinars and you hear fantastic ideas and things that you should be doing, I just want to acknowledge and recognize that you're also trying to manage and just get through the day-to-day. So one of the things that we've been chatting about as we talk about ways that can support small business, it's providing coaches, providing supports, providing folks that can stay with you and help you step back from the day-to-day, which is incredibly taxing in this environment, and think strategically, because asking someone to do both, it's a lot. So change is ongoing. Adaptation continues to be possible. I think one of the key takeaways is, although there are small changes, this is something that that still needs to be. We still need to think about the environment in the way that we were thinking about it back in the spring. However, This new flexibility is something that can help you ride this wave and future waves that are unrelated to the pandemic. The flexibility that people are learning and how quickly they're adapting is something that will benefit the company as you have to embrace slower pace changes after the pandemic is over. So looking to capture new customers, thinking about what is possible and advancing customer experience and offerings and shifting your offerings to align with the current consumer mindset, I think are three sort of priority areas to focus your efforts. And with that, I would love to hear folks' thoughts and questions.
Thanks very much, Leanne. That was a great presentation, and I have 3 questions that have come in the Q&A, and another half a dozen or so that have been sent to me privately or texted to me. If you'd like to turn the slides off, then people can see you. And I'll start with a question from Bernard LeBlanc from the Moncton Airport. He says, I would expect that any info into New Brunswick travel or out of province travel would be significantly reduced if quarantine restrictions remain in place. What is expected to happen to travel plans if everyone is continued to be required to quarantine?
We have done additional qualitative research where we ask people about that, and even in thinking about, so obviously people are remote working across the country. So there's a lot of folks that are moving in addition to travel for pleasure. And the quarantine in Atlantic Canada, while it makes Atlantic Canada a very appealing place, and we're doing very well in terms of enjoyment within the provinces, it is significantly reducing it as an option for travel, for pleasure, for outside, and even for folks that are thinking about relocating here to be able to work remotely. The quarantine has provided a lot of opportunity for certain industries within the provinces, but it definitely has drawbacks in terms of being able to draw on outside folks. And if it continues, I expect that's going to continue to reduce, especially if other places in Canada are able to kind of cap their cases again. If our quarantine remains, then we will see the effects from that.
Another question that came in related to that is the drops in public support that you saw, the numbers that went down for health measures. Do you attribute that to COVID fatigue, or to what do you attribute that?
Yeah, I would say that that's related to COVID fatigue. In particular, one thing I'd mentioned early on is it is important to keep checking in with folks because there are changes. It's interesting because we see some things that are remaining stable. So I'm curious to see when we check in again what that's going to look like, because this is something we haven't had the opportunity to see before. We don't know how people are going to react to this. It's never happened. So some things are fluctuating very quickly. And at the time that we collected that data in November, and I believe we found this in May as well, the provinces with the higher spikes had higher levels of concern, lower job security, and things. So you do see those things fluctuate, not a massive amount, but you see them fluctuate with something as simple as cases. So in a 2-week period, if you capture, if you were to take a look at one of the maritime provinces that had high cases, it was in Nova Scotia at the time in November that was experiencing some community spread and high cases. Our job security and confidence dropped a little lower than what it had been in May when we were doing really well. So I contributed a little bit to COVID fatigue. In particular, one thing I didn't note was there has been a drop in government leadership approval ratings as well. They're still very high, but there has been a drop. And again, I think that is attributed to COVID fatigue. But you do have to think about what's going on in the provinces at the time the data is collected. And it does seem to be closer tied to case spikes and immediate threat than overall fatigue.
Mm-hmm. Another question that came in, and actually there's 2 questions on this. I'll tie them together. One person said only 43% concern on job security. Would you suggest that's due to a large government component of New Brunswick employment? And another question related to that, if 43% of New Brunswickers are worried about job losses or job security, how will that impact consumer confidence in hampering an economic recovery?
I'm not sure on the first piece of that question as to whether or not it's due to a large government component in New Brunswick. I'm not sure. it's interesting to see that shift a little bit, because where we have managed to, we're 8 months in, those people who have managed to maintain their jobs in those companies that have pivoted and retained their employees, you would think would have increased that confidence a little bit. And employment has overall gone down quite a bit since the spring. Unemployment rather has gone down since the spring. So I would, I'm not sure on that because we haven't looked into that specifically, but I would guess that some of that is a halo effect from the other general concerns around health and the economy, rather than a specific concern about job loss. I would be interested to dig into that a little closer and ask folks about concerns about specific positions and reduced hours and things. But I mean, we do see that there are 38% of folks that we interviewed are still dealing with reduced hours, reduced shift, and job loss and things. So that's ongoing, and government supports are disappearing. So.
Another question that's come in: while we're seeing some employers rehire, did you ask the employers about their confidence of maintaining current employment levels moving forward?
We didn't at this round, but that would be something that would be very interesting to ask about. One thing that we are watching very closely is the indicators as this year moves forward, because again, with the changes in supports for businesses, there is some speculation that 2021 is going to be potentially more challenging than 2020 for some industries, especially as lockdowns continue and the vaccine rollout is such a slow burn.
Here's an interesting question. In terms of the drop in desire for premium products, is that an across the board reduction or really global premium products or outside the region? Is there a correlated drop in support or desire for premium products or paying extra, such as local craft beers or local products, and the desire to support local and experience local? Does that make up for that adjustment?
In terms of whether or not people are reallocating to local?
Well, the drop in desire for premium products, would that include local branded premium products as well?
People, I know there is research that we've seen that has said that people are willing to spend more on local, but there is a difference between what people would perceive as a luxury product and spending more on a local product. So I would say a local luxury product would be less likely to, folks are less likely to spend on that than local spending on things that they don't consider luxury. So I would say craft breweries, for example, would fall into not necessarily what people will consider luxury. However, things like blown glass giftware and things that might fall into the category of luxury, where they're not going to be looking for that local either.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation that behavior has shifted and it may remain shifted. Specifically, what behaviors were you referring to?
So we're expecting that the impact on the increase in or focus on buying local will remain for a chunk of folks. In particular, we're expecting that for the increase in younger consumers in buying local, that larger percentage of those groups will stay. Online shopping, looking for things online, curbside pickup, those types of things are the things that are going to have the largest impact. So although the majority of purchases are still brick and mortar for what people are looking for, the percentage of online shopping and the percentage of online sales has increased significantly. And those people who have moved to online shopping are likely to stay with online shopping.
Did the New Brunswick rebate for travel, do you think that had an impact or did it bump up the travel, or did it just reward those who did it?
That's interesting. We did ask about that in one of our projects very close to when it was released. So we wanted to go back and take a look at what that actually looked like in terms of use, because at the time you're only able to ask about intention. And I believe, if I remember correctly, what we found is that it didn't change people's, there was a slight increase in people's willingness to look around here, but it didn't really move anyone to spend anything that they weren't already willing to spend. So people were already looking around close to home, and it didn't move too much in terms of people's opinion. What I would be interested in looking at, being able to look back at the spend, is whether or not it increased people's spending for those people that did go.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the promise of the vaccine played a part in the higher travel interest in November than in May?
I don't actually think it did, because if you look at it, it didn't radiate beyond Atlantic Canada. So what I saw in the shift in terms of the higher increase in travel for Atlantic Canada and around the provinces is that back when we looked at it in May, people were still holding out hope, I think, that they would be able to travel outside of the Atlantic provinces. By the time November hit, I think people, travel had been canceled, people had missed travel for 2020. And so they're essentially saying, we're going to do something and it's going to be close to home. Again, I think the quarantine in that instance works in our favor, because there still is certainly a lot of folks are traveling around. So people are going down south, they're going to the States, they're hopping over places in certain countries, but we can't, if you choose to even go vacation in Quebec or Ontario, then you're subject to the quarantine when you come back. And so that's really keeping people close to home. Mm-hmm. So I think both of those things, people weren't sure if that was going to be lifted. So I think that plays a bigger part than the vaccine.
I have just two more questions and then we'll turn it to David. We'll make these really short ones. You mentioned that it would take years for the economy to recover, but given that real estate, car sales, pool installs, landscaping, renovations, those types of things have remained stable and in fact grown, what loss of business do you think will happen, or what percentage or what kinds of numbers?
If you look at how consumer spending is tracking, again, as I said, it's certainly down, but it's actually not too much lower than where we were if you take a look at January of last year. I think what is important to realize is that the spending has changed in terms of how people spend and where people spend, as opposed to overall. And also keeping in mind that marker in terms of economic confidence is what people perceive. So that's how people are thinking, but their spending is still going up. So, I mean, the concern that's linked to health and the view that the economy is not going to recover, it's interesting to see that difference between folks that are like, well, I'm not affected. I'm going to sort of continue to spend within my new parameters where I'm staying home. I'm not traveling a lot. I'm spending more on home things, but it's impacting other people quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So if that makes sense. So it's the perception of folks that it's not going to fully recover, but consumer spending is still going up, but it's in specific categories. So there's industries that are hit harder. There's specific spending patterns that have changed.
Mm-hmm. So the last question is a really quick one. How many people responded to the survey and what percentage overall?
In terms of the folks that we accessed in total?
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and take a look at that. So this was an online survey, which is important to keep in mind. We had 1,200 respondents, but in terms of the number of people that chose to go through, that's something I'd have to go back and take a look at.
Well, listen, we thank you very much. And I am going to turn the microphone over to David Duplessis from the St. John Region Chamber of Commerce to provide some closing comments.
Well, thank you, Krista. First of all, thank you so much to Victor Boudreau and to Leanne as well. The information you provided was invaluable. The interpretation and the analysis and trends as well, very, very helpful. We're very grateful for the work that M5 group of companies does, and we're delighted to be able to partner with you on this critical information. Thank you as well to my colleagues in Fredericton and Moncton, Kristen, John. It's always a pleasure. The three of us are joined at the hip now pretty much and collaborate on many, many things. And finally, a thank you to all of our members across the province that were able to attend. Special thank yous and shout outs. We had a lot of airport CEOs here, which is great to see. Mayor Mike O'Brien, welcome as well. Steve Lund from the Atlantic Chamber of Commerce. So a lot of people that were very happy that you were able to attend. And thank you once again, everyone. Stay safe, stay well. And if you have any questions, please reach out to any one of our chambers or the M5 group of companies. And again, thank you so much, Victor. Thank you, Leanne. An incredible presentation, and we're just delighted to be able to partner with you on it. Thank you.
Well, thanks again to the three chambers and to all the participants. We really appreciate the time. Hope it was valuable information. And if anybody wants to follow up, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you.